All right, welcome back to the channel. In the next couple of videos, I'm going to be doing some how to install aftermarket servos in the rear for this one. The next one, I'm going to do how to install the hop servo, how to adjust the endpoints, how to get everything set up so that if you're new to the RC world, you're getting some aftermarket servos, you want to put them in the RC. I'm going to show you how to get them all set up from the rear to the hop to the steering, everything. This one's going to be for the rear servos. You want to get some banging servos like these, some fast servos, not that junk that they come with. So with that, let's get into it. Now, something that's critical is you're going to have to know if you're new aftermarket servos and aftermarket servo horns are going to mechanically fit. So before you install anything with power, it might be a little tedious, but you got to do these things to make sure everything works right. Before you actually, put power to these things, put them into the RC and make sure that they're going to clear inside the fender well. Make sure they're gonna be able to pass this point here. So you don't need any power to do this. Just put the servo into the RC, hook up the servo horn, and make sure that the shock and servo horn are gonna be able to pass through there. And if it doesn't, make sure you grind off inside here with a Dremel before you actually do the installation properly with power and adjusting everything. Because if we put these servos in and then you go try and lift them up, they're gonna jam up on the side over here, and that can cause one of the servos to burn up quick. So you just want to test them mechanically before we go ahead and do the installation and setting all the endpoints and all that. We want to do this first just to make sure that our servo horns and our servos are going to be okay while we're doing the procedure. Okay, so first things first. When it comes to these high-end servos that have programmability, you're going to want to make sure that you do buy the programmer for the servo. If it's a Jeffries or an AGF RC servo, this one right here will work. If it's a Reef servo, you'll have to get the Reefs one. If it's a Power Hobby, you'll have to get the Power Hobby. But today we're working on an AGF RC servo, and this is pretty much similar to a Reefs 300. So when it comes to these kind of servos, if we want to use them in the rear, we have to increase the travel as much as possible so that we have as much range as these servos will allow us to have. So we get the programmer, we plug in the connector, put that into our USB, and we go ahead and plug that in. Have that servo pop up. There we go. All right, so we do have the servo information over here. So what you're going to want to do is take the travel range and put that to the maximum. So you want to put that to whatever the highest level is. You're going to want to take the PWM, that's the power. You're going to want to put that to 100%. And if it's a hop servo, you're going to want to put the sensitivity on ultra high. If it's a rear servo, I find keeping the sensitivity on high is best. When it comes to lose PPM protection, the option I choose is release. Once you got all the settings right, you click on the right button. It's going to write those parameters to the servo, and then we're good to go with this one. Now, if you don't have a computer, just write down the settings that I went through right now, bring this over to a hobby shop, and the guys at the hobby shop will be able to do that for you in just about as much time as it took me to do this over here. So with that, we're going to take our servo, unplug that from the dongle, boom, and we're going to bring this back over to the RC. Now that we got the servo programmed the way we want it, before we actually put it into the RC, we just want to make sure that we have the servo working in the right direction, and we're going to get the servo horn basically set up as best as it can, minus the final endpoint adjustments. We want to have that set up in our hand so that it doesn't accidentally go the wrong direction, snap something and break something when we put it into the RC. We kind of want to have it set up right before it goes in. So on the controller, the first thing we want to do is set the direction of the servo. So because I am using these switches here for the back instead of the front, I'm using these ones for the front. Now usually this would be I guess channel 5, but I guess it would be channel 6, but for me it's going to be channel 4. So with this one here, when I go up on the switch, we want to raise the suspension, so that would be the servo horn going down. And when we want to lower the suspension, for that to work, the servo horn goes up and it brings the suspension into the car, and the lowrider goes down. So lowering the switch brings the servo horn up and it lowers the car, and bringing it up goes the right direction. Switch up, this brings the servo horn down, and that would then lift up the suspension. Now because my passenger side, my direction was already going in the right direction, I have to reverse the direction for the driver's side. So you go into reverse, and my passenger side is number 4, so my driver's side is number 3. This is because, as we said before, I'm using 3 and 4 for the rear. So you use the enter button to get over to the channel you want to switch, and I'm going to switch this up to the opposite direction, and then I'm going to hold the save button to save it. So once we have it going in the right direction, we want to make sure we have the travel set up properly. So make sure you save when you're exiting, because we have this in the right direction, so we want that saved. And we switched over to endpoints. And for the rear servos, it's very important on these aftermarket servos, they don't have a crazy amount of travel, especially compared to the factory servos. We want to turn the endpoints to 120, 120 both ends. So for the switches, you just push it all the way up or push it down. Make sure that the arrow points at the right side, and you put those all to 120, 120. So now, as I said before, I'm using switches 3 and 4 for, I'm using switches 3 and 4 for my rear. So if you'll notice, 3 and 4 are both set to 120, 120, 120, 120. So we have the maximum travel range for those for the rear servos in either direction. And everything you do to the one side, you're doing the exact same thing to the opposite side, only instead of it being on this side, it's going to be flipped over and going the other direction. So continuing, we want to make sure that we have the servo horn on in the middle of its travel range. So basically looking at it like this, that's basically where we have it here. So I mean, if it was off at all, like take the servo horn off, if we accidentally put it on over here, notice travel range is lopsided. You kind of want to make it in the middle. And when it comes to the lowriders, fully lifted suspension is going to be when the shock is in line with the servo horn, when the two of them are basically lined up like that. So it's been a little while I've been messing with these, and I kind of got an idea of where that is, and it's a little bit less than where it is here. So this will give us a little bit of a room to adjust the endpoints inside the controller to just get that fine-tuned perfectly. So this is exactly how we want to have both servos set up before we actually install them into the RC. When it comes to the other side, the gear is going to be flipped over, so you just want to make sure that it does the exact same thing. When you go up on the stick, the servo goes up. The servo horn goes down. When you go down on the stick, the servo horn goes up. So we have it all set up and proper to go into the RC. We can go ahead and put the screw into the servo horn. It's important you do this now because we're not actually able to hit the screw with a screwdriver once it's installed inside the RC because we got the fender in the way. So make sure you do this part before you install it into the RC, or you're just gonna have to pull them out to do it afterwards. And when installing them, very, very easy. Just put them in place and don't connect it to the shock just yet. First, we want to just get the servo horn, the servo screwed into the RC, and it's not very easy to do it with the servo horn down like that. So what I always do is I drop the switch to make the servo horn raise up to the high point, so it's very, very easy to screw that onto the RC. Alright, so now that we have that nice and securely screwed into the RC, we can go ahead and attach the shock to the servo arm. Now, I like to bring it back. It doesn't seem like it's a little bit too far back from where we want the servo to go, so we're going to have to adjust the end point. This is going to be channel number, I believe it's 4, and it is, it's number 4. So on channel number 4, what we're going to do is we're going to bring the value down until I'm able to screw this in without a problem. So that's going to bring, there we go, it's nice and closer to the point where I can now screw this in. Pop this in, and my screw, a little spacer, and that goes right in. No problem whatsoever. Go ahead and screw this in tight. Alright, so the lower suspension, the drop endpoint on this side is set up. We don't have the raised up endpoint set up, but it's okay. We're gonna go ahead and move over to the other side and basically do the same thing, only for this side over here. And we're gonna do once we got both the lower side endpoints set up, then we're gonna move over to the high side. And it's both sticks down, so the servo horn is up. And now we're gonna switch over the endpoint to number 3. All right. And we're gonna lower the endpoint until I can fit the screw through the a little bit higher. Perfect. Now we'll go ahead and screw that in. Spacer. And that goes right through. Alright, so now the low side on both rear servos has been set up. Now we want to do the high side. So the high side is actually pretty easy. We just slowly keep raising the suspension on both sides until, you see how it goes a little too far there? We want to bring those back until they line up. So we just do lower the end point until when the stick is at the highest point, it's straight. So let's bring that down some. There we go. So we got the servo perfectly in line. Hold on, so you can see that proper. That looks good for me. So we got the servo horn and the shock perfectly in line. And we're just gonna go ahead and do the same thing to the other side. So all the way up, just a little bit too far. See that? Just a little bit too far there. I'm just gonna bring that down until the servo lines up. Just bringing the number down on that channel until the servo lines up with the stick all the way to the top. That looks pretty good. You want to make sure that both sides are the same. And that's that. So that is the rear end, both lowered and raised endpoints adjusted correctly. And as you'll notice, both sides are identical. Booyah. So with that, I hope the video is helpful in getting some aftermarket servos installed into the rear. Keep a lookout for the next video when I do the hop servo and the steering servo. With that, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.